Okay, I'm back. So what I've done is I've shaped the outside of the bowl and turned down cleaned up the cap ring as well. I used a steady rest. You can't really see it too much now. There's actually part of the steady rest um, is here. There's a single wheel that's touching. I took off the rest of the steady rest, which is this part, with the other two wheels because I need to it was getting in the way. So I have just right now I've had just one wheel of the steady rest um, supporting this, but it's round now, so it's not as much of a danger. By the way, I got this particular steady rest uh, from a, from a website called Ron Brown's Best. They make three different sizes depending on the size lathe you have. I have an 18-inch lathe, so I got the biggest size, which is for an 18 to 20-inch lathe. Um, I think you could probably, if you had a larger lathe, like a 24-inch lathe, you could probably use this one and just lift the base off a little bit, put something underneath it. Anyway, this is nice because it does um, a very large bowl in this case. This is a 13-inch bowl. I could probably go up to a 16-inch bowl, and this steady rest would still work. Carter makes a steady rest that is also very good, but only goes up to 12 inches. So that's why I got this one. Uh, so what I'm going to do now is actually do the inside. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go about it. I've seen guys that uh, do the inside slowly as they're adding rings. They'll add 5 rings. They'll do a little bit. They'll add another 5 rings. They'll do a little bit, and they work their way out on it. Eventually, they have to, if it gets far enough out like this, they have to put a steady rest on, and and it's to support it, which is what I should have done. That's probably the main reason that the catastrophic error happened, where I snapped off the base. Had I had a steady rest on there, that probably wouldn't have happened. Um, so this is a first for me. This is the biggest bowl I've done. It's the biggest diameter, 13-inch, and also it's a little over 6.5 inches high. So that's a pretty big bowl. And there was too much torque, and the fact that I had a smaller base on here, it snapped off. So that was my fault. So that was, as I said, this is uh, I'm pushing the envelope on this guy. Um, so what I like to do, as I said, you can do that from the inside if you like. But what I prefer to do is to get the whole thing together. I do the very base transition first, um, but then I wait until I get everything done. I shape the outside of the bowl, and then I can try to now match the shape of the inside to the shape of the outside bowl. So what I'm going to use today is the first time for me, another first, um, is this tool that's used really for hollow forms. It's a captured device where um, this thing basically controls it so that you can't actually, it's a lot less likely to get a catch. Um, so this is a carbide tool, and the thing I like about it is it's got this laser attachment to it. I'm going to move the camera in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. Well, that's as far as I can get. Um, so I don't know if you can see it, but there's a laser that comes down, and you can adjust it so that it's however, like it's a little bit more than a quarter of an inch away from the edge of my cutting tool. Um, so as you're cutting, it shines on the outside of the bowl, and as you get closer to the edge, it'll tell you when you're getting too close to the edge. So I can use that so I don't have to stop every minute or so and put a caliper on there. So I'm going to try that. Once I get further out here, the other thing that I'm doing this first for me is normally the bowls that I've made, all the bowls I've made so far, they either come straight out or they flare outward at the top. This is the first time the bowl is actually curving back in. So when I get up to the top, I'm going to use a slightly different tool in here. I'm going to replace this straight guy with this thing, which is designed to be able to go in there and get a blind curve like that. So I'm going to set my speed fairly low here. Now, just one thing to be aware if you've never turned before, the speed that is important is only the speed where the cutting head is touching the wood. So you have to be concerned about diameter. Because, for example, if you were to turn out here at 13 inches at 300 RPMs, you go into where it's 4 or 5 inches in diameter. Now that's equivalent to over 1,000 RPMs. So you just have to be aware that the speed that is important is the speed of where the wood is actually contacting the cutting tool. All right. So, by the way, this hollowing system is from a company called Simple Turning Tools, and I'll find the link for you. I just got this thing, so I've never used it, so this is a first for me. So we'll see how this works. You can hear the wheel on the steady rest contacting the wood too. You also want to feel with your fingers. Sometimes it's hard to see, like if you get dings or something with this active a look where you have all these different pieces. It's very hard sometimes to see if you've made a mistake or you got a catch. So far, it looks pretty good, although I can feel that I'm going to have to smooth out some of these because the curve is not exactly right. But right now I'm doing the roughing work. I'll finish it off. So once I get the inside completely shaped, then we're going to get into sanding. Oh, actually, I also have to come back and shape the base a little bit. But I'm not gonna show you all of that because again, my technique is not great, so you shouldn't be basing your your turning based on me. I'm not the greatest as far as technique is concerned. But what I'll do is I'll finish shaping the inside. I will shaping the outside of the what do you call it, of the base, and then the next order of things is I will completely sand the inside, completely sand the outside before I do the cutoff. And then what I'll do is I'm going to cut off the base, flip it around, put it on a cold draw, and then clean up the base. And then we'll have to resand the base, of course. And then we'll do finishing. But I won't get into sanding right now. I'll wait till we get all this done, and I'll come back and show you or at least talk about sanding. I don't think you need to see me sand. That's about as exciting as watching grass grow. But uh, I'll explain my, how I sand both the inside and the outside of the bowl, and also how we can get into finishing after that. And finishing is interesting, but we'll talk about that later. So I'll come back after I've got everything done and sanded just before the cutoff, and then we can talk about sanding and um, finishing. Okay. Okay, I'm back. I finished turning both the outside and the inside of the bowl, and I've also did a little shaping on the base. So I'm up to the point where I'm going to start sanding. So I want to talk about sanding. I'm not going to show you, you know, actual sanding because it's boring, but um, I'm going to go through my process, how I decide what to do, and how you go about this. So the first decision you have to make is, do you sand or don't you sand? Right? So there are skilled turners out there that can get a incredible finish just with the turning tools, and they think that's enough to for the finish they're looking for. I don't fall into that category, so I'm going to sand. So once you decide you're going to sand, you have to make two decisions. What is the coarsest grit you're going to start with, and what's the finest grit you're going to end with? So technically, what you ideally would you like to do is to get the really the finest grit that you can that will do the job, so that when everything is done, there's no blemishes at all. It looks great. The finish comes out great. Sometimes that's not easy to determine, especially with something as visually complex as one of these open segment bowls. So my opinion is that there's very little downside with starting with a coarser grain. So let's assume I could get by with starting with a 120 grit sandpaper on this. It still wouldn't hurt me to start at 80, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start at 80 grit sandpaper and walk my way up from there. And I'm going from 80 all the way up to either 1,000 or 1,200. So really, the only thing, if you do the correct job at the coarsest grit, the other grits are very easy and go very quickly. So I usually spend probably half my time on the coarsest grit, and then you can really go pretty quickly through the other grits. So, but you have to step through them in a certain manner. So here's the rule, and there's science behind it. I can't explain it, but I've seen explanations of it. So what you want is, let's assume you start with 80. You don't want to jump more than half of the grit you're on. So if you're starting with 80, the next grit, you don't want to go higher than 120. Once you get to 120, half of 120 is 60, so you don't want to jump from 120 past 180. So the grits I'm going to be using are going to be 80, 120, 180, and technically you could go from 180 to 270. However, I don't know of any manufacturers that make 270 grit sandpaper, so it's either going to be 220 or 240, depending on what the manufacturer is. So it's going to be 80, 120, 180, 240, 320, 400, 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200. Those are the grits that I'm going to use. You could technically, once you get into the really high grits like 600 and 1,000, you could go from 600 to 1,000, and I don't think anyone would notice a difference. But I'm gonna slip 800 in there as well. The other thing I will mention to you is when I get to 240, I stop and I take a damp paper towel and I just dampen the wood inside and outside and let it dry. And what that does is, when you're sanding with the grain, which is what you are in an open segment bowl like this, if you're sanding a spindle and the grain of the wood is going in the parallel to the axis of rotation, and you're sanding on the lathe with the lathe spinning, you don't have to do this, because you'll be sanding cross grain. Here we're sanding with the grain. And so what ends up happening is, and this varies by wood type, the open grain woods like oak and mahogany, they're very pronounced. Closed grain woods like maple, and much less. So what ends up happening is that when you sand, especially with the coarse grits, in the direction of the grain, and you bring it up, when you get to 220, you'll feel it, and it'll feel very smooth to the touch. You put a little water on it, let it dry, and you dampen it and let it dry, and now it feels coarse again. It's because you've raised those grains. So then all you do is you repeat the 240. So you've gone up to 240, dampen it, let it dry, do 240 again, and then you can go 320, 400, whatever. And that actually makes a big difference. Now, it depends on the type of wood you're using. So what I would recommend is go up to 240, feel it feels nice and smooth. Take a damp cloth, dampen it, let it dry, feel it again. If it feels at all coarser than it was before you dampened it, then repeat the 240. So anyway, so that will help when you go to finish, because if you don't do that, when you get up to the step of actually putting a finish on there, it can lift the grain, and now that coarseness is embedded in your finish, and then you have to sand again, which I don't like to sand after I start finishing. Okay, so let me explain. I use this type of sandpaper mainly, Merca Abernet. It's like a mesh sandpaper. It's more expensive than regular sandpaper, but I think you can get more life out of it. And it comes in sheets, or it comes in discs, 5-inch or 6-inch discs. It is more expensive, but I like it because it doesn't load up as much. It lasts longer, and doesn't produce as much sawdust. So that's up to you if you want to use it. Not necessary, but I'm just letting you know what I use. I also picked up this offset drill from Wood Turner's Wonders, and I've got this flexible pad on here, which the sandpaper will stick to, and I use it for the inside of the bowl. It's actually pretty nice because it'll conform to the curve inside the bowl. One other type of sandpaper that I found, this stuff that 3M makes. It's pretty cool, actually. It's like a rubber sandpaper. It's called super flexible sanding sheets. 3M makes them only in the upper grits. So they have a 320, a 400, an 800, a 1200. These also last longer. They're expensive, but they last longer than a regular sandpaper. The only thing you have to be concerned about, the blue side, by the way, is the abrasive side. Sometimes you can't even feel it. It's so fine. But the thing you have to be, technique-wise, you have to be concerned about is when you're sanding, you want to be moving, and you want to change where you're putting the pressure on the sandpaper. Because if you don't, here's what happens. See this little spot here? I ended up, I guess, had my finger on there too long, and the heat will actually melt it, and now this particular part of the sandpaper is not abrasive anymore. So it just takes a little technique, but but I use that as well. Um, so the only thing I would caution, the only times I've made work for myself is A, when I didn't start with a coarse enough grit, or I moved off that coarse grit too soon. So that's happened to me more times than I would like to admit, where even when now we're talking about bowls, just regular sanding, a plaque or whatever. Spend a lot of time on 80, then I go to 120, 180, and then by the time I get to either 180 or 240, I realize there's an imperfection that, you don't want to stay at the higher grit because your shoes will go out of style trying to get that thing out of there. So what you end up doing is having to go back to the 80 and spend more time on it. But all that work that you did from 120, 180, and 240 has to be repeated. So sometimes it's not. Sometimes these imperfections don't show up until you get into the higher grits, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you spend the correct amount of time, and sometimes it's frustrating because you want to get off that coarser grit when you're working, and it's like I can't wait to get off this thing. If you get off it too soon, it just makes more work for you. It's just not worth it. So stay with the coarsest grit that you're working with as long until you get it as perfect in that grit as you can, and then you move on. And if you do that, the other grits go really quickly. If you've done a great job at 80, 120, 180, 240, it's minutes on each thing instead of 45 minutes. So that's the thing to be careful. So you want to make sure you start with the coarsest grit that makes sense, and don't move off of it until it's perfect at that grit, and then it'll work out well. So that's all for now. I will come back when I've got the both the inside and the outside completely sanded, and the outside of the base here. And then I'll do the cutoff, and then we can talk after I do that. Then we can talk about finishing. Okay. Okay, I'm back. I finished sanding the inside, the outside, and the bottom up to 1200 grit. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, I should have about sanding is you got to make sure you protect yourself because. The sawdust, especially the extremely fine sawdust, when you get up into the 800 and 1200 grits, is very dangerous. So you need to at least wear an N95 mask. You can you should also try to suck the dust away from you any way you can, either with a dust collector or room air filter. I actually use, it's expensive. I actually use like a medical grade positive airflow thing. It looks like if I got a hazmat suit on. It's just a light hood that goes over your head, a tube, and this thing goes on your waist with a battery pack that filters the air and blows it in, so you can't possibly breathe it. But take whatever precautions you can, because if you're doing this a lot, it's not good for your health to breathe in this stuff. Anyway, so I've done that. Now what I'm about to do is cut off the base. So what I'm going to do is take some coal jaws, right? If I don't know if I've ever seen these before, but I'm going to put it on the open side of the bowl. We have to put we have to arrange it so that it opens from the outside, opens up and squeezes from the inside to the outside. So I'm opening it up now, and eventually it should catch the wood. That should be good. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is take this little gizmo, which is pretty cool. So this has the same threads as the lathe has. So this is a 1.25 by 8 TPI. It can it's got this little attachment here, so you can put it in a drawer in a drill chuck. So let me thread this in here. So the reason you need to do this is that when this thing gets cut off, I don't want this thing dropping onto the lathe and getting damaged. And then what we're going to do after that, after we do that, is we're going to turn it around. We're going to put the Jacob's chuck with the coal jaws on this side to drive it, and then we'll put some pressure against it, and then we can clean up the bottom. So what I'm going to do first is take a little a cutoff tool and go as close to the waste block as I can. Actually, I'm trying to preserve the waste block so I can use it again. Now, because this thing is live again, this works. So turn it on. All right, I'm just going far enough so that I can get a pull saw in there. It's done. All right, so what I'll do is I'll shift this around, put it over here, and then we'll start to clean up the bottom. Okay. Okay, so I flipped it around. I put the Jacob's chuck with the coal jaws over here. So now I'm going to clean up just the bottom of the base, and I moved this tailstock in to give it some support, because coal jaws are not great at holding things. They're not very strong. So by pushing this point in, I can push this against the coal jaw plates, and it should be more stable. But of course, I can't get down and do this last piece here. So what'll happen is at the end of this, just as I get down to that piece, there'll be a little nub there. Then I can back this off and clean up the nub by hand or on the lathe, because there's not much torque there. So after that's done, I'm going to resand the base all through the grits, starting at 80, going up to 1200, and then we'll be ready to start the finishing, and I'll come back when we're ready for that. Okay? Okay, we're at the finishing step. I use Danish oil and a system called a Beal buffing system. And I got this tip. I had been using the Beal buffing system, but I've been using tung oil instead of Danish oil, and I'd only been putting one coat on. And I saw this gentleman give a presentation at the Long Island Woodturners, and he had some beautiful finishes on his bowls, and he mentioned that he uses the Beal buffing system like I do. So I spoke to him afterwards, and I asked him what finish he used. He used Danish oil, and he puts it on a specific way. You basically put it on liberally, okay? And you wait 2 hours, and you wipe off the excess. It's a bit of a mess because this is an open segment bowl, but And then you wait 2 days for everything to dry and harden and all that good stuff. And then you repeat the process. You put a second coat on liberally, wait 2 hours, and wipe off the excess. And wait another 2 days, and then use the Beal buffing system, which is what I'll show you afterwards. And the finish is quite good. Now, I mention everyone has their own method of finishing. One thing you have to be concerned about with an open segment bowl is you have all these holes. So if you use a finish that is like a waxy kind of finish, it could end up getting into the holes, and you don't want to have to be cleaning that out afterwards. Just realize that in this bowl, for example, there's 2,232 holes on the outside and 2,232 holes on the inside. So you don't want to make that kind of a job for yourself. So whatever finish you use, make sure you don't have to clean up in the, clean up afterwards, because you have buildup inside the holes. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to just let this sit for 2 hours. I'm going to come back and just wipe off the excess. I'm not going to show you that. And then I'm going to repeat the process in 2 days. And then I'll come back after 2 more days, and we'll buff it up. And I'll show you how that works. Okay? Okay, well, here we are back. This second coat of finish has dried, the Danish oil. By the way, I forgot to mention the gentleman's name who turned me on to the double coat of Danish oil. His name is Dennis Fuge, Fuge. A very nice guy, and does absolutely beautiful work with his bowls. So I just want to give him credit for that. Anyway, so here we are. Some people might stop at this point and basically say, that's it. Looks good. Does actually look pretty good. But if you go to the next step and actually polish it, I think it's that much better. Anyway, but you don't have to do that. So the system I use is a system called the Beal buffing system, Beall. Now, they used to sell it directly from their website. Their website still exists, but I don't believe you can order anything from them anymore. The Beal retired, and so Lee Valley took over selling his stuff. So if you want to get this system, you got to go to Lee Valley, I believe. Okay, so it consists of 3 buffing wheels and 3 different compounds. So the coarsest one is something called Tripoli. By the way, the wheels themselves are different. So these wheels are made up of a series of just fabric circles. The coarsest one, the Tripoli, which is the one you use first, I believe is all linen. All these sheets are linen sheets. The white diamond, which is the next one, which is super fine abrasive, it's really just designed to take off whatever Tripoli stuff is on there. This one will take off the scratches, any microscopic scratches. This one is even finer, but this wheel is made of flannel and linen. Every other sheet is flannel and linen. And the last thing you do is you put on wax. And this is carnauba wax, which is the same wax you use for cars. It's like the hardest wax available, I think. It's actually vegetable based. So this is food safe, actually. And actually, so is the Danish oil. They say the Danish oil is food safe after 30 days. But on something like this, where you're not going to put any liquids in it and you're not going to be cutting on it, you don't have to wait the 30 days, I don't think. Um, but anyway, so this is all food safe stuff, and this wheel is the softest. It's all flannel. Um, so it it's very simple. You just well, first of all, you need a buffing um, a buffer that turns at anywhere from 1700 to 1800 RPMs. Uh, Now they also have uh, a similar set of small these circular guys, which are used for small bowls. Um, However, these you have to turn at a much faster RPM because they're smaller. So these you would turn at about 3600 RPM, twice what you would turn these guys at. Uh, so if you're going to get a buffing system and you want to use both these things, you need to get one that's variable speed. I bought a jet variable speed that goes anywhere from like 900 up to 3600, um, and I'm very happy with that. So I got that actually even before I got the lathe, just to do my normal finishing. It's really a great system. Um, they also have a version of these 8-inch um, ones that you can mount on the lathe. It's like a mandrel where these wheels are like 4 or 5 inches apart. Now, I don't think it would be good for doing a large bowl like this because you wouldn't be able to get in there. Um, so, but it would be great for doing like little things, like if you were doing pens or any type of small things, finials, or anything that would be smaller. You could do it on the lathe, which is nice. Um, it's nice to also have all three things lined up. You don't have to change it. Although these things have a quick change, it comes with a quick change mechanism. It takes just a second or two to change it out. No tools required. Um, so I will do that. One thing I wanted to tell you that before we actually get into this. By the way, these are new wheels, so you're going to see when I'm doing it. It's going to kick off a bunch of like little threads, which happens in the beginning. I tried to get some of it off with a stick with 80 grit sandpaper on it, but this is my old wheel. You can see the difference in size. This thing started out this size, and you can see it's worn down quite a bit. Um, so I got a new set, uh, and we're going to do it. Now, the one thing I will tell you about, uh, well, two things. One, you want to wear gloves, especially with the Tripoli, because if it gets in your hands, it gets pretty hot. So it'll burn your hands if you're not careful. So I wear gloves when I'm doing it. And the other thing is, as the wheel is spinning, it's coming towards you. If you were to catch a top edge like this as it's coming down, it has the potential of ripping the work out of your hands and smashing it on the ground. So you have to be very careful how you hold the thing and how you approach it. So you never want to, as this thing is spinning towards you, you never want to have an edge that gets caught at the top here. You always want to be doing it from underneath. So just be careful about that. I will also be wearing probably an N95 mask because, especially the Tripoli stuff, it's not good to breathe in because little particles of it will come off. So I wear an N95 mask, and because these are new things, I may actually put an apron on just because these little hair things get thrown off in the beginning when you first start using these wheels. All right, so. Okay, here's what the bowl finally came out like. Finish is excellent. Here are a couple of other bowls that that I did. The one right next to it, the maple and the yellow heart and purple heart. That one is also 72 segments per ring, and that has 1,675 pieces in it. So the one I just made is a little bit bigger than that. And of course, I showed you that other small one that had 373 pieces. Anyway, that's basically how you do these things. If you enjoyed, this YouTube video, I'd appreciate it if you like it. And you can put comments, positive or negative. And have a nice day.